Welcome in this course. We're going to talk about function in JavaScript. The idea here is by learning how to use function in JavaScript, you can actually improve your JavaScript skills. Yes, that is correct. So everything goes around function, and as long as you know how to work with function, you will really be good at writing code in JavaScript. So the first function we're going to have here is identity. And one of the things we do during this exercise is to actually use test-driven development as a way to assess that the function we're writing is actually fixing the tests that are associated with it, right? So on the left, you see right there that there is the function right there, and then on the right here, you see that the tests are failing. Okay, so the tests are available right here, as you can see, and the implementation should happen right there. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and implement that, and then we should be able to see step by step how this works. So the first thing here is, if we look at the spec, file, we see indeed that all the way at the top, it called an identity function that comes from this folder right there. Okay, and then it says that there is identity right there, and it should return the same value that has been passed, right? So the first one say identity 1 and return 1. Second one, identity with an object, return an object right there. And then same thing here with packages. So how do we implement that? So let's go and do that. So the first thing we're going to do is to export that function, right? The default export there allows us to basically say, hey, identity here, you've been exported on the other side as a default, right? It's not really as identity, because that name here really doesn't matter, but I'll show you that in a bit. And then what we have here, we can see already on the right that it says that expected 1 and then return undefined, right? So the function right there is being called, but he expects 1 and gets undefined. Undefined because in JavaScript, by default, everything is, if you don't return anything, it actually returns undefined. You see, by putting undefined here, it's really not different that as if I didn't put anything right there. So if I do return 1, we're going to see that this one is now passing, but that's really not the aim, because now it's saying, hey, there is this function that receive an object, and you expect an object in return, and now we're returning 1. So if we go ahead and return this object, we're going to see that doesn't work. So if you're working with test-driven development, the idea there is to really be dumb about the implementation. And what we're going to do here is basically pass a value, and then have that value passed there. So as you can see now, our tests are passing and everything is working really well. So let's do a quick takeaway of what we have right there. So the main takeaway is the fact that here we use the export default to export that function identity that is then being used in the spec file right there. But once again, because it's an identity, it's a default export. Here, that doesn't really matter that it's called identity right there. We can call that, let's say, ident or whatever, literally. And then right there, we're just going to replace this with whatever, and it will still work, right? So that's basically the main idea, because that name that doesn't really matter. It actually it will matter in one specific scenario. Here, for example, if I had a function called identity, I will be having a conflict. For example, here say, hey, I have a function that is being passed here that is called identity. Boom, you see on the right away is complaining that, hey, there are conflict of name right there. So what you really need to understand is this one gives you the possibility to give it whatever name you want. You can go ahead and say, hey, I'm going to call that underscore. It will be a valid name, right? And then here we can replace this with, let me do that, and with underscore here, and still work basically, right? So that's where when you import something right there as default, you can give it whatever name you want. That's why actually I don't use default value, because default value, they really don't help you. I believe that default value were a mistake in this configuration. So what I suggest people to always do is, instead of having a default value, is to use a name import, right? So let's go back to the identity here. So instead of having this way, we could just say, oh, export this like that, right? So now I'm not exporting default, I'm exporting this way. And then if you go back to the spec, you're going to see that now I can actually import identity. And when I'm importing it, you see it just by typing I see that there is an identity thing available right there. So now I can move like this and then replace all of this with identity like that, and that should literally work, right? So that's basically it for this one, and hopefully that was clear. It was not about only the identity function, it was about the mechanism around it. Now that you understand that, we're going to move on to the next one.